My parents told me they were downsizing. Then I found out they'd bought my sister a $400,000 house while I was renting a studio. When I asked why, my mom said, "She's starting a family. You're just alone." So I just nodded. 6 months later, my startup sold for $8 million, and when they asked for help, I just said, "Ask the one who's starting a family." I, 31M, always knew my sister was the favorite. That's not self-pity talking, just a fact I'd accepted somewhere around my 15th birthday when they missed my science fair to attend her cheerleading practice. But knowing something and having it confirmed in the most brutal way possible are two very different things. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Mom sounded cheerful, almost rehearsed, as she explained they were downsizing. The family home, the 4-bedroom colonial I'd grown up in, was too much for them now. They wanted something smaller, more manageable. I told them it made sense and even offered to help them look at condos the following weekend. She thanked me, but said they had it handled. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. 3 weeks later, I stopped by their place unannounced with takeout. I did this sometimes, usually when work got overwhelming and I needed the comfort of familiar walls. The house looked the same as always. No moving boxes, no real estate signs, nothing to suggest they were preparing to leave. When I asked about the downsizing, Dad got this weird look on his face and mumbled something about still exploring options. Mom quickly changed the subject to my sister's pregnancy, her second kid, and how excited they all were. I left feeling unsettled, but pushed it aside. Work consumed most of my headspace anyway. My startup, a logistics software platform I'd been building for 3 years, was finally gaining traction. We'd landed 2 major clients and were in talks with several others. My co-founder and I were working 16-hour days, living on coffee and ambition. I was still in my shoebox studio apartment, the same one I'd moved into after college, because every spare dollar went back into the company. The truth came out at Sunday dinner a month later. My sister mentioned something about her new neighborhood, and I asked what she meant. She looked confused, then glanced at our parents. The table went silent. That's when it spilled out, piece by uncomfortable piece. They hadn't downsized. They'd taken out a home equity loan on their house and bought my sister a 4-bedroom colonial across town for $100,000. They'd helped with the down payment, covered closing costs, the whole package. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I was hearing. My sister and her husband both had decent jobs. They weren't struggling. Meanwhile, I was eating ramen 3 nights a week and hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. I asked why they hadn't mentioned this to me, why they'd lied about downsizing. Mom set down her wine glass and gave me this look, the one she always used when she thought I was being difficult. She said my sister was starting a family, building something real. Then she paused and added that I was just me, still playing around with my computer stuff, still renting. Just me. Those words hit like a physical blow. I nodded slowly, picked up my fork, and finished my meal in silence. Nobody else seemed to notice anything wrong. The conversation moved on to baby names and preschool options. I left early, claiming work deadlines, and drove back to my studio in a daze. The following weeks were strange. I didn't call them, and they didn't call me. I threw myself into work with a fury I hadn't known I possessed. Every late night, every rejected pitch, every line of code became fuel. My co-founder noticed the change, but didn't comment. We were too close to something big. Then it happened. A major tech company had been watching us for months, impressed by our client retention and growth metrics. They made an offer. We countered. They came back higher. After 2 months of negotiations and due diligence, we signed the papers. $8 million. My share, after splits and investor payouts, was substantial enough that I'd never have to worry about rent again. I didn't tell my parents right away. I moved out of the studio into a decent 2-bedroom apartment, nothing flashy, and paid off my student loans. The money felt surreal, like it might vanish if I celebrated too loudly. My co-founder bought a Tesla and took his family to Europe. I bought a used car that didn't make weird noises and finally replaced my 7-year-old laptop. News travels, though, especially in families. My sister saw something on LinkedIn where the acquisition was announced. She called Mom, Mom called Dad, and Dad called me. He wanted to meet for lunch. I agreed, curious about what this conversation would look like. We met at a diner halfway between us. Dad looked older somehow, more worn around the edges. He congratulated me on the sale, said he always knew I had it in me. I thanked him and waited. The real reason for lunch came with the coffee. They were in trouble. The home equity loan had seemed manageable when they took it out, but Dad's hours at work had been cut, and their own mortgage was still substantial. They were drowning in payments. Mom hadn't wanted to worry anyone, but they needed help. I sipped my coffee and listened as he laid out numbers, interest rates, monthly obligations. He didn't directly ask for money, but the implication hung heavy between us. When he finished, he looked at me with something between hope and expectation. I set down my cup and told him I understood their situation. Then I suggested he ask my sister for help, the one who was starting a family, building something real. After all, I was just me. His face changed color. He started to speak, but I cut him off. Not angry, just matter of fact. I reminded him that when I was building my company, working 100-hour weeks, barely surviving, they'd had $400,000 to spare. They'd chosen where that money went based on who they valued more. Now I was making the same kind of choice. I paid for lunch and left. Dad called twice that evening. I didn't pick up. Mom texted asking me to be reasonable, saying family was supposed to help family. I didn't respond. My sister sent a long message about how disappointed she was in me, how our parents had sacrificed so much over the years. I blocked her number. The guilt came in waves. I'd been raised to respect family, to honor parents, to be the bigger person. But underneath the guilt was something harder and cleaner. They'd made their priorities clear. I was simply doing the same. 3 months passed. I heard through a mutual family friend that my parents had refinanced some things, and my sister and her husband had taken over some of the loan payments. They were managing, barely, but managing. I felt no satisfaction in their struggle, but I also felt no obligation to ease it. I started dating someone I met through work, someone who didn't know my family history and saw me just as I was. We took a trip to Japan, something I'd always wanted to do. I hired a financial advisor and started thinking about what came next professionally. Life moved forward. Update 1. The first contact came 6 months after that lunch. An email from my sister, no subject line. She didn't apologize exactly, but acknowledged things had been said and done that hurt me. She mentioned her kids, how she wanted them to know their uncle. She suggested coffee. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, Mom tried. A card arrived in the mail, one of those flowery Hallmark things with a generic message about love and family. Inside, she'd written that she'd been thinking about our last conversations and wanted to talk. There was no acknowledgement of what she'd said, no recognition of why I'd pulled away. Just a vague invitation to reconnect. I threw it away. Dad was the only one who came close to understanding. He showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, no warning, just knocked on the door. I almost didn't let him in, but something about how tired he looked made me step aside. We sat in my living room, that awkward silence stretching between us. He told me he'd been wrong, that he'd let Mom's favoritism blind him, that he'd failed me as a father. His voice cracked on that last part. I wanted to be moved. Part of me was. But apologies don't erase decades of being second choice. I told him I appreciated him coming, that I accepted his apology, but that trust wasn't something I could just switch back on. He nodded like he'd expected that answer and asked if maybe someday we could try again. I said maybe, but I didn't mean it. What I didn't tell him was that I'd started building something new, a foundation that funded scholarships for first-generation college students trying to start businesses. Kids who didn't have family money or safety nets, who were just them, trying to build something real. The irony wasn't lost on me. The money my parents had needed would have covered the foundation's first year of operations. Instead, it was funding 5 young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself at 23. Work on the foundation consumed me. My girlfriend, who'd become my fiancée by then, supported it fully. She'd grown up in a similar situation, the overlooked kid who'd had to prove herself at every turn. We understood each other in ways that required no explanation. When I told her about the scholarship program, she suggested we make it bigger, more impactful. We started planning together. My parents found out about the foundation through a local news article. They called, both of them on speakerphone, voices full of pride. They wanted to be involved, maybe attend the first scholarship ceremony. I told them the event was private, just recipients and board members. Mom's voice got that edge it always had when she didn't get her way. She said I was being petty, punishing them by excluding them from this good thing I was doing. I hung up. The ceremony happened without them. 5 brilliant kids, scared and hopeful, receiving funding that might change their lives. One of them cried. Another couldn't stop thanking us. I thought about my studio apartment, the ramen dinners, The nights I'd wondered if I was delusional for thinking my company could succeed. No one had handed me $400,000. I'd built something from nothing because I had no other choice. Update 2. A year after the sale, I got engaged officially. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and a few relatives. I invited my parents. I didn't invite my sister. Mom called immediately, asking how I could exclude my own sister from my wedding. I told her the same way she'd excluded me from the family's financial priorities. She hung up on me. Dad called back an hour later, calmer. He said they wouldn't come if my sister wasn't invited, that splitting the family like this was wrong. I told him that was his choice to make. He tried to argue, to explain that my sister had kids now, that it would devastate them to know their parents couldn't attend their uncle's wedding. I pointed out that I'd managed to survive plenty of devastation in my life. He could too. They didn't come. My fiancé's family filled the seats that would have been theirs. Her dad walked her down the aisle and gave a toast about building your own family when the one you're born into fails you. It stung in the way truth does, but it also felt liberating. I wasn't the abandoned kid anymore. I was someone who'd chosen differently. The wedding photos circulated on social media. My sister left a comment on one, something passive-aggressive about hoping I was happy with my choices. I deleted it and made my profile private. A cousin messaged me privately, saying I was being harsh, that parents make mistakes and I was lucky they'd even wanted to give my sister help. I blocked the cousin. What surprised me was how little I missed them. I'd expected some lingering sense of loss, some mornings where I'd wake up and regret my choices. Instead, I felt lighter. The obligation to perform gratitude, to accept crumbs and call it love, was gone. My wife and I built routines that had nothing to do with Sunday dinners or guilt-laden phone calls. We traveled. We worked on projects we cared about. We made plans that didn't include anyone's approval but our own. The foundation grew. By year 2, we'd expanded to 10 scholarships. By year 3, 20. We started getting applications from across the state. Kids with stories that broke and inspired in equal measure. Some came from families who'd supported them. Many didn't. Those were the ones I paid closest attention to, the ones who understood what it meant to build something alone. One recipient, a young woman from a rough neighborhood, told me during her interview that her parents had told her college was a waste, that she should get a real job and help support her younger siblings. She'd worked 3 jobs, saved everything, and applied to schools anyway. When she got in, they'd refused to help with even the paperwork. She'd figured it out alone. Her application essay had made me cry. She reminded me that being just you was sometimes the greatest gift, because it meant you answered to no one but yourself. Update 3. 3 years after the sale, my sister's marriage fell apart. I heard about it through that same family friend who'd updated me before. Her husband had been having an affair, wanted a divorce, and was fighting her on custody. She'd quit her job when the second kid was born and was now facing the prospect of single parenthood with minimal work history and a mortgage she couldn't afford alone. Mom called me, not to apologize, not to acknowledge anything, but to tell me my sister needed help. She'd already helped as much as she could, and Dad's retirement wasn't enough to cover more. She needed me to step up, to be a good brother, to help family. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Instead, I asked if she remembered telling me I was just me. Silence. Then she said that was years ago, that I needed to let it go. I told her I had let it go, let it all go, including any obligation to clean up messes I didn't make. She called me cruel and hung up. Dad tried next. His approach was softer, more pleading. He talked about the kids, about how they didn't deserve to suffer because their parents had problems. I agreed. They didn't deserve it. But neither had I deserved to be treated as less than. And life's unfairness didn't start when it became convenient for my family to notice. He asked what it would take for me to forgive them. I told him the truth. I had forgiven them. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or funding their mistakes. It meant I'd released the anger and moved on. Moving on meant they were no longer my responsibility. My sister reached out directly after that. Her message was long, desperate. She apologized for everything, for being the favorite, for not standing up for me, for the wedding comment. All of it. She said she understood now what it felt like to be abandoned by family, to need help and have no one willing to give it. She begged me to help her keep her house, to make sure her kids had stability. She promised she'd pay me back, though we both knew that was impossible. I sat with that message for a week. My wife asked what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to prove I was better than the treatment I'd received. Another part knew that helping would just reset the dynamic, make me the family ATM they could ignore until they needed something. In the end, I sent a brief response. I told my sister I was sorry she was going through this, but that I couldn't help. I recommended some resources for single parents and wished her well. She didn't respond. Mom sent one final email calling me heartless. Dad stopped trying. The family friend who'd been updating me mentioned at one point that my sister had moved in with our parents temporarily, that they'd worked something out with the house. Life, apparently, went on without my intervention. My wife and I bought a house. Nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable place with room for the life we were building. We talked about kids, about what kind of parents we wanted to be. I told her about growing up as the invisible child, about the particular pain of being loved less for reasons you can't control. She understood. We promised each other that if we had children, we'd see them each as individuals, that we'd never make one feel like they were just them, as if existing without meeting certain milestones was somehow insufficient. The foundation hit its 5-year mark. We'd funded 50 scholarships by then, watched young people launch businesses, graduate from schools they'd thought were impossible, break cycles of poverty and doubt. At the anniversary event, one of the first recipients gave a speech. She talked about being told she wasn't enough, that her dreams were too big, that people like her didn't get lucky breaks. Then someone had believed in her, she said, looking right at me. Not because of who her family was or what she could offer in return, but because she'd been willing to work for it. I thought about my parents in that moment, about the arbitrary way they'd decided who deserved investment. My sister had been starting a family, as if that made her inherently more valuable. I'd been building a business, but that hadn't counted because it didn't fit their image of success. Now I was building futures for people who reminded me that worth isn't determined by other people's priorities. It's determined by what you do when no one believes in you. I never reconciled with my family. That might disappoint people reading this, looking for a neat ending where everyone learns and grows and comes together. Real life isn't always that clean. Sometimes people hurt you in ways that can't be fixed with apologies and time. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away and build something better with people who see your value. My parents are older now, probably dealing with their own regrets. My sister is presumably managing as a single mother, hopefully teaching her kids lessons she learned the hard way. I don't wish them harm. I also don't spend my energy worrying about them. They made their choices. I made mine. When I look at my life now, the business I built, the foundation changing lives, the partnership with my wife, I don't see someone who was just me. I see someone who took that dismissal and transformed it into fuel. Being underestimated is a gift if you use it right. It frees you from expectations, from the obligation to perform gratitude for scraps. Sometimes people ask if I regret my decision, if I wish I'd been the bigger person. The answer is simple. I was the bigger person. I built something meaningful from nothing while they invested in the sure thing. When they needed help, I set the same boundaries they'd set with me. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. And honestly, I've never slept better. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too.